The check was already in his jacket pocket when they started laughing. Deshaun Ellery sat in the fourth row of Harwick Academy's commencement ceremony, in a rented gown that was half an inch too short and shoes he had polished the night before, because they were the only dress shoes he owned. And he listened to the two boys behind him talk about him. The way people talk about someone they've decided isn't worth lowering their voice for. He heard the word scholarship. He heard the word charity. He heard one of them say that it was funny, actually funny, wasn't it? That a kid who couldn't afford the alumni donation drive was sitting in the same row as people whose families had endowed chairs. He heard laughter. He did not turn around. He was 22 years old, 4 hours from walking across a stage to receive a diploma from one of the most expensive private universities in the country, and in the left interior pocket of his rented gown was a certified check for $4.2 million made out to the Harwick Academy Foundation. It was for the science wing. The whole science wing, the one the school had been fundraising for across 3 years and 2 gala events and 47 alumni appeals that Deshaun had received by email and read without responding to, while he was quietly deciding exactly when and exactly how he wanted this moment to go. Now, he had decided. The ceremony was about to begin. Rewind 8 years. Deshaun Ellery arrived at Harwick Academy on a full merit scholarship at 14, from the Westwood Public Housing Complex in Baltimore, carrying everything he needed for a semester in one duffel bag and a backpack that had belonged to his older cousin. His mother, Sandra, had driven him the 3 hours from Baltimore in a car that required the heat to be run at full blast even in September, because the engine ran cold, and they couldn't afford to fix it that year. She had cried once, briefly in the parking lot before he got out, and then composed herself and straightened his collar and told him to pay attention and ask questions and never let anyone make him feel small. He had tried to live by all three. The first two were easy. Deshaun had been paying attention and asking questions since he was 6 years old and had taught himself basic algebra from a library book, because the math his school was teaching felt slow. His mind worked the way certain kinds of minds work, not just quickly, but architecturally, seeing structure where other people saw surface, finding the organizing principle underneath things before anyone had identified it for him. He had a particular gift for physics and computer science that his 7th grade teacher, a man named Mr. Osai, who recognized it immediately, had spent a year channeling into the right competitions and programs until Deshaun's results were impossible to ignore. The third one, not letting anyone make him feel small, was harder. Not because Harwick Academy was overtly hostile. It was not. The school prided itself on its diversity initiative, on the scholarship program that had brought Deshaun and 11 other students from under-resourced backgrounds into its marble hallways and well-funded labs, on the language of inclusion that appeared in its brochures and in the speeches its headmaster gave at the beginning of every term. The diversity initiative had a coordinator and a budget and an annual report. The language was genuine. The effort was real. The hostility at Harwick was the other kind. Ambient, social, structural. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but accumulates in the small daily arithmetic of who gets invited where, and who gets looked through at the dining hall, and whose name the house parent forgets after 3 weeks, when she has already learned everyone else's. It lived in the subtle difference between the way the school talked about the scholarship program in public-facing materials and the way the word scholarship lived in certain conversations as a shorthand for something else. It lived in the experience of sitting in a classroom where your ideas were absorbed into the group discussion without attribution, and then attributed to someone else. Deshaun noticed everything. He cataloged it with the same precision he brought to a physics problem set, not for the purpose of grievance, but for the purpose of understanding the system he was inside. You could not navigate a system you didn't understand, and you could not change a system you couldn't see clearly. He kept his head down. He did the work. The work was extraordinary. By the end of his sophomore year, he had the highest grade point average in the junior class across all 3 science disciplines: physics, chemistry, and computer science. He had won a regional mathematics competition and placed second in a national one. Results that the school announced in the weekly newsletter, without mentioning that he was on scholarship, which Deshawn had noticed was different from how they announced the achievements of students whose families had buildings named after them. Those announcements mentioned the family. The scholarship students' announcements mentioned the school. He said nothing about any of this. He kept his head down and did the work and paid attention and asked questions, and some nights, on the phone with his mother, he described the gap between what Harwick said it was and what it actually felt like to be inside it. Sandra listened to everything and then said, "Stay. Because the diploma is real even if some of the people aren't. And because what you're learning in those labs is real. Take the real things and leave the rest." He took the real things. The 2 boys behind him at graduation, Connor Whitfield and James Bray, had been at Harwick since 6th grade. Their families were in the alumni registry, going back 2 generations. Connor's grandfather had donated the gymnasium. James's family had endowed a faculty position in the history department. They were not cruel in the deliberate sense. They were the product of a world that had never required them to consider what it was like to carry something they hadn't chosen to pick up. And they moved through that world with the frictionless ease of people for whom every system has always been designed. Deshawn had been in classes with both of them for 4 years. He had sat across from them in the physics lab and the computer science seminar and the senior thesis workshop. He had, more than once, quietly corrected errors in their problem sets during group sessions in a way that was helpful rather than pointed. Because he was not that kind of person, and because his mother had told him that being better than someone was about what you built, not what you said. He had been building something for 2 years. The money came from the right combination of the right things at the right time, which is how money always comes when it does, not from luck alone, but from preparation meeting the moment that luck provides. Deshawn had entered Harwick as a 14-year-old with a gift for systems. He left it 4 years later with that gift refined by the best science and mathematics instruction in the region and a clarity about what he wanted to build next. He deferred his university acceptance for a year. In that year, working from a desk in his mother's apartment in Baltimore with 2 monitors and a library card and the discipline of someone who has never had the option of wasting time, he built the first version of a logistics optimization tool that identified inefficiencies in last-mile delivery routing with an accuracy that existing commercial tools could not match. He was 15 years old when he had the first working version. He did not tell anyone at Harwick. The tool was not ready, and more importantly, he was not ready. He had learned early that showing something before it was finished was a way of inviting other people's limitations into a project before it had the strength to survive them. He did not sell it at 15. He kept building, refining the algorithm, expanding the use cases, consuming every paper he could find on supply chain optimization and probabilistic routing, and the specific mathematical structures that underlie the problems he was trying to solve. He took his university place the following year and kept building through his undergraduate years at a pace that his professors found either impressive or alarming, depending on their temperament and their relationship with the question of what their students might accomplish without them. In his junior year, he filed the first patent. In his senior year, a logistics technology firm contacted him after seeing a research paper he had published and offered to license the core algorithm. He did not license it. He incorporated a company instead. He was 20 years old. The firm that had approached him about licensing became his first enterprise client. The second came 4 months later. By the time Deshawn was sitting in the fourth row at Harwick Academy's commencement ceremony in his rented gown, his company had closed a Series A funding round of $31 million and was processing routing optimization data for 11 logistics clients across 4 countries. The certified check in his jacket pocket represented roughly 13.5% of the Series A. He had written it from his personal allocation, not from the company, not from investors, from his own money. The money he had made from the thing he had built in the apartment in Baltimore, while Harwick Academy was sending him alumni fundraising emails he was not yet ready to respond to. He had been planning this day for 8 months. He had called the foundation's director in February and told her he wanted to make a gift. He had not told her how much. He had asked about the Science Wing fundraising campaign, which was at $1.1 million of a $4.2 million goal after 3 years of appeals. He had listened carefully to the gap. Then, he had said he would be in touch and had not been in touch again until the week before graduation, when he had called the director back and asked for the name and routing information for the foundation's account. He had carried the check to every day of the commencement weekend, without telling anyone what it said. The ceremony began. The headmaster gave the opening address, the kind of speech that Harwick gave well, polished and warm, and precisely calibrated to the room, full of language about community and excellence and the shared investment of everyone present in each other's futures. Deshawn sat in the fourth row and listened with the focused attention he brought to everything and thought about the word community and what it meant when you applied it to a place, and then thought about who had and hadn't felt included in it. The student speaker, a young woman named Maya Osei, no relation to his 7th grade teacher, who had been elected by her class for her intellect and her humor and the particular quality of presence she had in any room she entered, gave a speech that was better than the headmaster's. She talked about the gap between who you arrive as and who you leave as. She looked out at the assembled families and alumni and faculty and said that a Harwick education was not something that happened to you. It was something you built, year by year, choice by choice, in the lab and the library, and the moments when you could have taken the easier road. Deshawn watched her and thought, yes, his row was called to walk in the 3rd group. He crossed the stage, shook the headmaster's hand, accepted the diploma, heard his name read aloud into the warm June air. He walked back to his seat. He sat down. He put the diploma in his lap. Behind him, Connor Whitfield said something to James Bray in a low voice that Deshawn caught half of. The half he caught included the phrase "full ride" and something about the alumni donation drive that the school had been running all weekend, the one where graduating seniors were encouraged to make a first gift to the foundation as a gesture of connection to the institution. The recommended first gift was $250. Deshawn had received this recommendation in an email 3 months ago. He had read it. He had not responded. He reached into his jacket pocket. He held the check for a moment, feeling the weight of paper that had been folded and unfolded many times in the past 8 months. In moments when he thought about this day and what he wanted it to mean, he thought about his mother in the parking lot, straightening his collar. He thought about Mr. Osei telling him what he had. He thought about 4 years of being looked through and talked past and described in a newsletter without the word that would explain why a kid from Westwood Public Housing was sitting in Harwick's physics lab. He thought about the gap in that fundraising campaign. $3.1 million short, 3 years of trying, the science wing sitting on architectural drawings while the school kept sending emails. He stood up. He did not look at Connor or James. He did not need to. He was not doing this for them or at them. He was doing it because he had decided 8 months ago exactly what he wanted this day to mean. And what he wanted it to mean had nothing to do with the people behind him and everything to do with the people who would come after him. The next class of scholarship students, the next generation of kids from Westwood and places like it who would sit in labs that bore the names of people who had not always been allowed in those rooms. He walked to the foundation table at the edge of the ceremony grounds, a long folding table under a white tent, covered with brochures and pledge cards, and a small sign that said Harwick Legacy Gifts. The development staff member was a woman in her 40s named Patricia Hollis, who had been working this table all weekend with the patient optimism of someone whose job required them to ask people for money at a moment when everyone was feeling sentimental. She had collected 6 $250 checks and 2 pledges that morning and was currently writing in her log when Deshawn approached. He set the certified check on the table, face up. Patricia looked at it. The amount was printed in the center in the clear, unambiguous font of a cashier's check. $4,200,000, Lars. She looked at the number. She looked at the payee line. She looked at the memo line, which read, Science Wing Campaign, Full Completion. She looked up at him. Her face did a specific thing that the faces of development professionals do when they receive information so far outside the expected range that the normal processing routine simply stops. A brief, absolute stillness, followed by the rapid recalibration of everything. She said, Is this? She stopped. She picked up the check with both hands, the way you pick up something you are not yet entirely certain is real. She read it again, top to bottom. Slowly, she said, Mr. Ellery, this is the entire campaign. He said, The Gap. I wanted to close it today. She looked at his name. She looked at the graduation program still folded on the corner of the table, the one that had the names of this morning's graduates in it. Something moved across her face as the connection completed. She said, You walked across the stage this morning. He said, Yes. She said, And you? She stopped again. She set the check down on the table, very carefully. She said, For the science lab specifically? He said, Yes. I'd like the labs named for 2 people, Ida B. Wells and Percy Levon Julian. I'll put the naming request in writing this week. She looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone who has spent a career in development work and has just understood that they are in a moment that will be described in the years ahead, at every conference and in every training session about why the work matters. She said, Mr. Ellery, can I ask? Why today? He thought about it for a moment. Then he said, because the timing was right. He took the receipt she handed him. He folded it and put it in his jacket pocket, in the exact place the check had been. He walked back to his seat in the 4th row and sat down and watched the rest of the commencement with the same focused attention he had brought to everything at Harwick Academy for 4 years. Behind him, Connor Whitfield and James Bray said nothing for the remainder of the ceremony. The announcement went out in the school's evening newsletter 5 hours after the ceremony ended. The subject line read, Historic Gift Completes Science Wing Campaign. The body of the email identified the donor by name and described the gift as completing 3 years of fundraising in a single contribution. It noted that the labs would be named for Ida B. Wells and Percy Levon Julian, and included a brief description of each. Wells, the journalist and civil rights pioneer; Julian, the chemist and inventor whose work had saved thousands of lives and who had been denied access to several of the universities whose chemistry departments would later celebrate his legacy. Deshawn had chosen the names carefully. The email went to every alumnus and family in the school's database. Several of those alumni forwarded it. By the following morning, it had been shared more than 4,000 times across social media platforms. A technology publication ran a brief item on the company that had produced the Series A. A Baltimore newspaper ran a longer piece, a real piece, a reported one, about the kid from Westwood Public Housing who had taught himself algebra from a library book and what he had done with it. His mother called him when she saw the newsletter. She was crying, not the brief, controlled cry from the parking lot 8 years ago, but a longer one, the kind that comes out when something you have been holding for a long time finally has a place to go. He listened to her for a while. Then he said, "I paid attention. I asked questions." She laughed through the crying. She said, "And?" He said, "And I didn't let them make me feel small." She said, "That's my boy." The science wing opened 2 years later, in September, in a ceremony that Deshaun attended in his own suit. Not rented, not borrowed, not polished the night before, because it was the only one. Just a suit that fit. The headmaster gave a speech. Several faculty members spoke. A student from the current junior class, a girl from the school's scholarship cohort who was taking advanced chemistry and who had been told about the donor during a brief introduction the week before, stood at the podium and said that she wanted to be a chemist, and that she had looked up Percy Levon Julian when she heard his name, and that she thought it mattered. She said this very directly, the way young people sometimes say true things, that the room she would be learning chemistry in was named for someone who had not always been allowed in those rooms. Deshaun sat in the front row and watched her and thought, yes, that's exactly right. He did not give a speech. He had not been asked to, and would not have wanted to. What he had wanted to say had been said in the act, in the 2 names on the wall, in the $4.2 million that had come from the apartment in Baltimore, and the library card, and the 4 years of keeping his head down and doing the work while no one thought to lower their voice. He had said it in the way that lasts. The check. The names, the room where the next generation of scientists, some of them from Westwood, some of them from places like Westwood, some of them not yet imagined, would learn that the world was made of systems that could be understood, and structures that could be built, and gaps that, in the right hands, could be closed. He shook the headmaster's hand. He said goodbye to the development director, who had framed the receipt on the wall of her office. He walked to his car in the school's parking lot, the lot where his mother had straightened his collar 8 years before. He drove home. He had work to do.